theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to spend some time talking about a number of issues in this first hour all over the map, because there are so many different things to talk about. One, first of all, we want to mention, if you've been paying attention, what has been happening in Sydney, Australia, now because of the action by the police using automatic weapons, flash grenades, and the rest. They've been able to end that standoff of 16 hours in which you had a jihadist. I'm going to say more about him in just a minute, and the individuals that he was holding hostage. He is dead, and so are two of the hostages, but a series of explosions believed to be gunshots and flash grenades came just about 2:30 in the morning local time, as several more hostages, where a man identified as the man Haran Moranis, an Iranian who is known for sending hate mail to families of fallen soldiers, was holed up with an unknown number of hostages and captives. So this is something that has come to an end, but it is, again, one more reminder that we live in a time in which terrorism can take place, and oftentimes takes place in very visible situations. We can, of course, think about 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Centers, the buildings, and, of course, the attack on the Pentagon, and, of course, maybe the original attempt was even to attack the Capitol and the White House. We've seen, of course, in Canada, the same thing in Ottawa, and now in Sydney. These are in high-profile locations where they are actually going to get the greatest amount of media attention. And sometimes our philosophy around here at Point of View is to give it less attention rather than to give these terrorists and these other hostage takers what they want, to ignore them as much as we can. But at the same time, the Sydney siege is over, says the New South Wales police. And it kind of brings up another story I want to talk about for just a minute, and we'll get into some of the conversation we were going to have today. And that is that the Sydney siege, as some are saying, could be a part of a pattern this year in which jihadists responding to a call to arms by the Islamic State have urged lone wolf attackers to strike back at the West. You know, you've had some people that say, well, these aren't real jihadists. They aren't really Islamists, whatever phrase you want to use, because they're not really connected. They are self-described. They don't have their papers from ISIS. I don't know if ISIS gives out diplomas and papers. I'm sure they don't. But you can see the point. I'm being somewhat facetious that oftentimes they're easily discounted. And yet there are individuals now that are beginning to recognize that this is a real problem. An anti-terrorism expert from the Royal United Services Institute said, we have not seen a huge amount of evidence of ISIS cells going abroad from Syria and Iraq, but we have seen a number of attacks by people claiming links to the group. And so I think you can begin to see that we're seeing a very disturbing pattern. In May, for example, you have an individual who was under the surveillance of the French police after returning from fighting with ISIL in Syria, launched a gun attack at the Jewish Museum in Brussels, killed 4. In August, David Cameron warned that ISIL now poses a direct threat, arguing that if the UK does not indeed deal with some of these issues, it will only go stronger until it targets us on the streets. Of course, I mentioned what happened in Canada. In October, you had a situation in which this individual ran down 2 Canadian soldiers in Quebec in his car, killing one of them. And then, of course, you had the attack of the soldiers at the Canadian Parliament also in October. So you can go through a list, and I won't continue that list because I think it shows you that this is happening not just in the United States, but in any country that could be identified as sympathetic to the United States or identified as a sworn enemy of ISIS or ISIL. And so we see again what happened in Australia. We were supposed to have today Judge Napolitano with us. He had to reschedule, but one of the things we were going to talk about, and I will still talk about because we have posted one of his commentaries on this issue of torture, but it all comes from a book that he has written just recently called Suicide Pact. And the title of it, interestingly enough, comes from a line that appeared in a Supreme Court decision back in 1949. And that's where, in I think a very poorly reasoned dissent, nevertheless, Justice argued that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. And that was quoted quite often after the war on terror began to take off. And the argument that you get from Judge Napolitano in the book is that under the last two presidents, that would be George W. Bush and Barack Obama, we have seen a vast expansion of government power under the president, and that the presidents have been able to exercise a level of power and authority and control which is really unprecedented. But as soon as I say that, we certainly can point out Abraham Lincoln actually using all sorts of various devices and suspending habeas corpus. We can, of course, think of Franklin Delano Roosevelt interning Japanese citizens and all sorts of things as you go along that long, long list. But the point he made is that mantra was coming from those who made the argument that when we have liberty and we have order, sometimes order has to trump liberty. The Constitution obviously provides us with great liberties, but it's not a suicide pact, and that is we can't allow individuals to use our liberty against us and eventually kill the nation or kill individuals. And so that was used for some time. Well, he actually starts mocking the statement and saying that in a sense, the phrase suicide pact, as he talks about it, could mean that a constitution which permits the government to violate it and the president to do secretly and with impunity is a suicide pact with the states that formed it and the American people whose freedoms it was intended to secure, because it will result in such a loss of liberty that it will bring about the self-destruction of our formerly free society. It's suicide, if you will. So that's the title of his book. We will get back to it when he can join us, but I thought it would be good to take one element of that because it relates to the conversation that we had on Friday, and that has to do with that particular report that came out from the CIA. Because when you look at that report, it is important to remind ourselves what actually was the reason for the report in the first place. Now, on the one hand, obviously, as we've pointed out on this program before, it's somewhat politically motivated. Why now, as we're getting into the Christmas season, did Dianne Feinstein want to release the report? And the answer is very simple. In a few days, matter of fact, essentially now, she is no longer the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee because the Republicans will control the Senate in January, and so the possibility of that report being released is slim to none. So the political aspect is significant. But when we come back from the break, I want to spend a little bit of time reading from the piece by Andrew Napolitano. And if you would like to get a copy of it, it is posted on our website. It's entitled The CIA and Its Torturers, because he reminds us that if really it hadn't been for the decision on the part of the CIA's torture unit to destroy videotapes of what they did, the investigation may never have taken place. And once it did, we learned a lot more about the threats to our freedom. So I'm going to read from that. Also have a very good piece by our good friend Eric Metaxas today, The Torture Report. Then we're going to move on to some other topics. But as we go along, if you would like to join our conversation today, we have an opportunity in this first hour for an open line. At any point, you can feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. I might mention in the second hour today, going to be talking with Troy Newman about his new book, Abortion Free, talking about how to close down abortion clinics in your own community. Very practical information, and we'll spend some time with him in the second hour talking about that. But in the first hour, we're going to focus on a number of issues in the news, and we'll come back and continue that conversation right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
What will be the financial impact of President Obama's executive order concerning nearly 5 million undocumented immigrants? The White House has acknowledged that these newly legalized workers will contribute to Social Security and Medicare.
Will this help us with our current crisis of entitlements or make the problem worse? There are some who believe that it will help since we will have millions more paying into Social Security and Medicare. I even had one caller suggest this might be a way to deal with a problem created by abortion. We have aborted millions of unborn children who could have been taxpayers paying into the system as millions of baby boomers are retiring. He thought these new immigrants might replace those lost to abortion. Dr. Merrill Matthews runs the numbers and shows that there might be an initial benefit that will be followed by a financial unbalance that will make the problem much worse. The long-term unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare are at $49 trillion. We already have a problem because people are retiring and receiving these benefits and receiving more in benefits than those two programs that they paid into the system. The newly legalized immigrants will be paying into the system even less for two reasons. First, their likely income will be less than the average worker, and second, they will be paying into the system for a shorter time. Most of the newly legalized are working-age adults with children already in their 40s who would only pay FICA taxes for perhaps 15 to 20 years. They may help the government trust fund initially, assuming they all quickly find good-paying jobs, but they will be fully eligible for these government programs when they retire. Using one simulation model, Dr. Matthews estimates that the government will receive about $500 billion in payroll tax revenue, and the government could expect to pay out about $2 trillion in benefits over several decades. In other words, if you do the math, you see that this executive order will make the entitlement crisis even worse. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the things we're talking about is the expansion of government power, and it's something I think is really powerful when you try to connect all sorts of different stories, because this particular book that came out, and we'll spend more time talking about it later, Suicide Pact, really kind of pulls together a lot of different strands, as does John Whitehead's book, because both of those books are saying that because government has grown stronger and because we have put more and allowed governments of various sorts and police officers and others to have more power, some of the kinds of things that people are protesting in the streets right now are just an illustration, maybe a symptom of a broader problem. I think I would say right now to the protesters who are protesting what happened in Ferguson and what happened in New York and the fact that there were two non-indictments, need to, in a sense, look at the broader picture that we've talked about before, the militarization of the police force, the growing expansion of the federal government, the amount of discretionary power that is put in the hands of the president. And we're not just talking about President Barack Obama, because quite frankly, in Andrew Napolitano's book, a lot of it goes all the way back to George W. Bush. But let's take the issue of torture for just a minute, because the first article that we've posted on our website today kind of takes the ideas that are in his book, Suicide Pact, and applies them to this particular issue. He said, when the head of the CIA's torture unit decided to destroy videotapes of his team's horrific work, he unwittingly set in motion a series of events that led to the release this week of the most massive, detailed documentation of unlawful behavior by high-ranking government officials and intentional infliction of pain on non-combatants by the United States government since the Civil War era. Then he goes on to tell the story. He says one of the reasons repeatedly stated by President George W. Bush for the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 was the maintenance of torture rooms by Saddam Hussein. He says while making this very argument, Andrew Napolitano says Bush was secretly authorizing CIA agents to engage in similar unlawful behavior for similar purposes, intelligence and deterrence. And so he goes on to explain some of that. But then the point is that, as I pointed out a minute ago, what started this investigation in part was the destruction of those tapes. Now, that caused individuals in the Senate Intelligence Committee, and in particular Senator Dianne Feinstein, to say, you supposedly have told us everything that took place. So why the need to destroy the tapes if indeed those might have other information you did not tell us? So they began to investigate the CIA. And this is where Andrew Napolitano pulls together another story that we heard about, but I'd never really connected until I read Andrew Napolitano's piece. And that is, he says that during the course of the investigation, Senate investigators suspected that their computers had been hacked. When they brought those suspicions to Senator Dianne Feinstein, she ordered another investigation, this one aimed at identifying the hackers. That investigation revealed that the CIA itself was spying on its own Senate investigators. She took it, of course, to John Brennan, and and everybody said, no. Well, finally, when she had released incontrovertible evidence of CIA domestic spying, at that point, the CIA director, John Brennan, admitted that his agents had spied on their regulators, which, by the way, now is a second federal crime in addition to the one we just mentioned a minute ago about unlawfully executing torture, but claimed that it was needed because the regulators had exceeded their authority by examining CIA documents. Well, you can go through the long list, and the fact that the final report is 6,000 pages, we're not going to even try to summarize all of those, but the conclusion comes actually before the end of the article, but I think it helps you understand the conclusion from Judge Andrew Napolitano. And he said, if indeed these allegations in the report are true, he says we have war criminals, perjurers, computer hackers, and thugs on the government payroll. We also have dupes. The most politically successful argument of the torture lobby has been that we are all safer because of these dirty deeds. This Senate report refutes that argument, that demonstrating that no serious actionable intelligence came from the torture. So that's one of the issues I wanted to put on the table. And if you would like to read the article in its entirety, it is there. In the future, we'll try to get Judge Napolitano on to talk about his book, Suicide Pact. But just before I start taking some phone calls, let me put one more on the table. By the way, if you'd like to join us, we're already starting to get calls. So if you'd like to call and make your comments about this torture report, certainly we will take some more phone calls on that. And then I'm going to move on to some other issues that are certainly relevant as well. But today, Eric Metaxas has written on, in his Breakpoint commentary, the torture report violating human dignity. And he talks about the 6,000-page report or the 500-page executive summary, goes into some of the background. But let me get to the punchline, and that is he uses a good example of how this report shocks the conscience, and he says especially the Christian conscience. And that is, he says, take the case of Nazar Ali. Ali was no al-Qaeda mastermind. In fact, his own captors described him as intellectually challenged. Yet he was held in the facilities that the CIA used for what is described as enhanced interrogation. Not because he knew anything. In fact, it was not clear that he was interrogated at all. Instead, the report states that Ali was detained solely as leverage to get a family member to provide information. Part of that leverage included playing a tape of Nazir Ali crying for his kinsman. Compared to others held in detention, Nazir Ali certainly got off lightly. The CIA is known to have waterboarded at least 3 prisoners. Until a few years ago, no one disputed that waterboarding is a form of torture, and for good reason. Waterboarding stimulates drowning and can, according to Wikipedia, cause brain damage from oxygen deprivation, damage to lungs, and in some cases even death. But let's put the waterboarding controversy aside, he says. Those who were not waterboarded were subjected to practices such as standing on broken limbs for hours and being deprived of sleep for up to 180 hours, sometimes standing, sometimes with their arms shackled above their heads. And he says those are the ones I can name without getting an R rating. Again, some people insist the report is politically motivated attack on the Bush administration and that the report gives aid to our enemies. Neither or both may be true, but for Christians, it doesn't matter. Goes on to say that's because torture, as John Paul II wrote in The Splendor of Truth, is intrinsically evil. It's always wrong, regardless of the circumstances. The use of physical and psychological violence to extract information is contrary to respect for the person and for human dignity. And he says it's not only the Catholics, a statement on torture signed by, among others, Rick Warren, Ron Sider, my friend Frederica Mathis Green, rightly insists that torture violates the basic dignity of the human person and degrades everyone involved, policymakers, perpetrators, and victims. Of course, he says I could add another part of the American people where we can make clear that torture is incompatible with basic human decency. We should give our leaders permission, that is political cover, to act in ways that are consistent with the basic dignity of the human person. If we don't, he says, we're also tainted. A lot more to say, but I wanted to give some of you a chance to join our conversation today. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to the state of Maine, WBCI. Todd, thank you for calling today.
How are you?
I'm good. What would you like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to just touch base, just on this report that's come out. I know, as we all know, the methods that they used might have been, and were pretty extreme. But I guess it's the timing, as you were sharing earlier.
Sure.
Considering, what's going on with ISIS and a lot of the terrorist groups around the world, I don't know. I guess my concern is, in some ways, by releasing this report, is it in violation of national security?
And again, there have been some arguments on both sides that on the one side, we need to release this so that we can clear up this and provide accountability, which I agree with. And so I agree with that part of the argument. On the other side, there have been some that are saying we may jeopardize covert agents, and I'm concerned about that as well. So I find myself a little more divided, because each time I hear one side make the argument, I find that there is some merit in part of their argument, but at the same time, I, as a Christian, want to hold to the basic dignity of human beings, but also wonder about the political motivation behind all of it. And I think it's really easy to say that there is one very good reason why this report came out now, and that is it is doubtful that it would ever be released once Republicans take over the Senate Intelligence Committee. Is there a reason for us to look at this and hold government programs accountable? Certainly. At the same time, should we be careful that we don't do something that jeopardizes our standing and even our moral standing before the world? And I think that's another very good question as well.
Yeah, and I guess my concern is, now, especially with the executions that we've seen televised on TV of different foreign correspondents and everything else, you're just actually, with this release, it's kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Yeah.
I guess that's my concern with, regardless, of course, we want to know the truth. But at the same time, the timing, considering all that's happening around the world right now, it definitely was not very good. So.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
C.S. Lewis once wrote that there is no such thing as an ordinary person, because every one of us will live forever, either in darkness or in glory. Point of View deals with eternal things, applying God's truth to all of life for the good of those made in the Creator's image. God has used Point of View to inspire all kinds of people, from congressmen to attorneys, school administrators to police officers, doctors to maintenance men, and everything in between. And one very recently left an $18,000 gift in his will to help us keep making a difference. I'd love to see one person today give $5,000, and a handful more send $300, and maybe you can give $30 or $100. Help us match that gift before the end of this year. God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to give you a chance to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Started out by talking about that terrorist attack by that lone terrorist in Sydney, Australia, but how I see that connected to many of the other possible attacks in the future and some of those in the past with some of these lone wolf terrorists that are being empowered by ISIS to go out and to create as much havoc as possible. And, of course, we've been talking about this terror report, or the torture report, and that came from the CIA. And if you'd like to join the conversation on that, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls and move on to some other topics, but at the moment, that is the topic on the screen that many of you want to address. So let's go to Ohio this time. Brett, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, I was just wondering exactly, how do you believe these terrorists should be questioned, and how do you believe we should get information from these terrorists?
Well, first of all, I think, need to stop drone killing some of them, because we can't get any information when we kill them. And I think the solution on the part of the Obama administration has been, we want to clear out Guantanamo, so if we get prisoners, we're never going to get rid of that. So there have been more drone strikes under this president than any other. Now, that being said, this report, I think, deserves more attention. Now, I just pointed out that Dianne Feinstein is going to step down, not willingly, but once you have Republicans in control, the new chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee will be Richard Burr. And so he is the senator from North Carolina. By the way, Saxby Chambliss had been, but he's stepping down. Also, Tom Coburn is. So it's going to be a bunch of new faces, by the way, in that Intelligence Committee. But I would say that we should, and maybe we can create an action alert or something like that to ask Richard Burr to actually investigate this. I think there is a need for investigation. But then back to your broader question, which I talked about on Friday, we need to have a better definition of torture. When they sometimes say we cannot do anything that they call enhanced interrogations, I would make a real distinction between some of the psychological things that they've done. For example, keeping people awake, putting them in isolation, solitary confinement, those kinds of things. Sometimes maybe even misleading them about what information they have. Those, I think, are all permissible, and I don't call those torture. If it is, then that means that when I went through my fraternity initiation, I was being tortured. Or when even Penna the other day was saying, I'm kind of sleep deprived right now because it's the Christmas season. I see that very different than, say, waterboarding or pulling out fingers, cutting off hands. You see what I'm saying? I think a proper definition of torture is key, and we've got to stop some of the liberals from saying, well, anything that messes with a person's mind is torture. Well, no, not really. There are some things that you can do to create some stress in an individual so that they might break and thus give you actionable information. And so I think those are the kind of questions that we should be asking in the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I hope that the incoming chairman, Richard Burr, will do that with an even hand and with some fairness. What do you think?
All right. Yeah, I was kind of confused when I first turned on the station. I thought it was saying that, pretty much as the liberals are saying, that everything we've done to get information from these terrorists is considered torture, and I don't see how you can consider all that torture. I mean, we're trying to extract information for them. They're not giving it up willingly.
Sure. And I probably should have started. Every time we talk about this, I usually start, since I recognize people tune in and tune out, but almost always I start by saying I think we need a clear definition of torture. And so I probably should have done that earlier, and you helped me clarify that, because I say that some of these enhanced interrogation techniques I don't think are torture. Keeping a person awake for many hours, playing music they don't like to hear, those kinds of things, putting them in solitary confinement, maybe confusing them about what information you already have and misleading them. I think that's all fair game. That is very, very different than poking needles in people and, all the other things that are part of that report. And so I think there is a sense in which we can extract meaningful information. As a matter of fact, one of the individuals that they got information from, who then eventually, this was secondarily led to the location of Osama bin Laden, was one where they just simply used some of those techniques of isolation and sleep deprivation, where he began to talk about one of these individuals that then ultimately led them to the location of Osama bin Laden, which is also where I disagree with the report when they say there was no actionable information. I'm not so sure about that. There seems to be a few cases that have even been reported in the news, and of course we'll never know all of them because a lot of those are classified, that indeed are the case. So, Brett, I appreciate your phone call. Let me take some more phone calls since we have quite a few here today. We'll head to Mississippi. Robert, thank you for joining us today.
How are you doing today?
Very good. What would you like to share?
Well, several things. Police force across the United States is being militarized by the DOD. And it doesn't need to be. I mean, we're heading straight for Nazi Germany if we continue to give police departments the power that our government's trying to give them. And second of all, I agree with exactly what you just said about a firm definition of what torture is. I've got an uncle that was in World War II, and he witnessed people's fingernails being snatched out of their hands while they were to try to extract information. Now, that's torture. When these guys have not been maimed in any way, size, shape, or form, and they're being fed by the United States taxpayers, they have not been tortured.
That's what I would agree with. Okay, I appreciate that. And let me take your first point, because I still think that this is an issue that even the people out there protesting right now about Michael Brown and all the rest don't understand the bigger issue, and that is we are militarizing the police right now. And I still think the best book on that subject is A Government of Wolves by John Whitehead. He's been on the program a number of times. You can go to our website and even listen to some of the previous interviews. I still think one of the best books on the growth of government and the loss of our civil liberties right now is John Whitehead's book. Probably the best book on the history of the loss of our civil liberties and the growth of government is the book we were going to talk about today with Judge Andrew Napolitano, Suicide Pact. So you can see why I want to get him on here as soon as we can make that possible, because he gives you the whole history. He takes you from George Washington all the way through Abraham Lincoln to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and then, of course, the two greatest places where I think we've lost our liberties have been under the Bush administration and under the Obama administration. But those are some books I would recommend to you. And if you are concerned about this, certainly those are resources. If you also go to our website and want to read some of my commentaries, you can type in things like militarization of the police, civil liberties. You'll see some of the commentaries I've written on that as well. But let's get back to a few more phone calls, and I think we'll go to Evelyn in Illinois, WPEO in Peoria, Illinois. Thank you for calling today.
Hi, I'm wondering about the timing of the report being released by Democrats, a Democratic Senate, and is it a distraction from the everything that's going on in the Obama administration? All his different policies that are not good. I mean, like the health care, law. And is that all a distraction? I think it's funny that the Democrats would be releasing this when their whole platform is against a child in the womb.
Yes, we're going to be talking about that second hour here. You're going to see a real irony when we have Troy Newman with us and we're talking about abortion after we've been talking about torture and terrorists. Go ahead.
They're worried about torture of people that are a threat to our country. And like you said, we need to define torture, and there should be some guidelines. I'm for that. But I look at, their whole platform. We've killed how many babies? And they're worried about
50 million. Even as I did a commentary that you'll hear later this week about just the number of African American unborn that are killed every day. This comes from our friend Star Parker and also Gary Bauer. It's just these are mind-numbing numbers. Even though we should be so concerned about black kids being killed in Chicago and all the rest, when you put that up against 1,500 black babies aborted every day in round number. You just go, phew. You're focusing on the wrong issues, and that's so typical.
It goes right along with the Obama administration. I feel like this is all a distraction. You know what? He left our ambassador in Benghazi with no help. I'm a Navy brat, and my son-in-law just got back from Afghanistan. And I think it's deplorable that those guys that were left over there, they are tested. They're telling the truth, and nobody's even covering it. They're saying that they were told to stand down. What happened to not leaving anybody behind?
That's right.
He left our ambassador with no protection, and we've got a report coming out from a Democratic Senate that doesn't believe in saving babies' lives, and they're worried about. Yeah, I don't know. I'm conflicted. I do believe there should be some guidelines when it comes to torture, and anyway.
Yeah, well, I think you've made your point, and you've made it very well. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talked about Judge Napolitano. He was supposed to be on with us today. We think he might be on with us Wednesday, and if you would like to join us then, we'll certainly get into these other loss of civil liberties, and he'll have some things to say, obviously, about the torture report, but it's much broader than that, and we'll get into that with him perhaps on Wednesday. I think Evelyn did a good job of talking about the fact that this terror report and torture report might be a little bit of a distraction. I think Sharon in South Carolina, listening on WLPE, wants to talk about that. So, Sharon, you have the floor.
I feel the same way, that this is just a smokescreen to cover up, first of all, Hillary Clinton's involvement with Benghazi, and that it has not been answered for. And also, I agree with her about the abortions, 57 million abortions, some of them with the needles stuck into their head in utero, or their limbs torn off. That's torture. Where's the 6,000-page report from Dianne Feinstein about that?
I think I'll ask Troy Newman about that in the second hour, because we're going to be talking about his book, Abortion Free, and how they've been very successful at Operation Rescue and closing down abortion clinics. But yeah, I mean, this selective concern. I've even been concerned about the fact that even, and I don't want this to be misperceived, the concern rightly about two young men, African-American men, killed by the police, no indictments, but when you have so many other black Americans are killed in, I'll just use Chicago since that's one place where there's been a high death toll. But then even put that next to the numbers I gave you just a minute ago, because that is one of my commentaries coming out this week. If you run the numbers, we kill 1,500 black Americans in the womb every single day. Now, when you start showing concern about the 1,500 black Americans, unborn children killed in the womb, then I think you can also be concerned about the tens of thousands that are killed every year in places like Chicago and other crime areas, and then also show concern about 2 individuals that were killed by the police. But I think you need to get some priorities straight, and it doesn't seem to me we have our priorities straight right now. What are your thoughts?
Right. Well, yeah, it's, unborn babies can't vote, so they don't have a voice. They don't have a Dianne Feinstein speaking out for them. And, those are citizens.
Future
American citizens.
Potential citizens, if we would allow them to just put these unborn babies in a non-hostile environment, and they are what we call babies. They all want to call them products of conception or fetal material, but we know what they are. I've never seen a woman ever go to a fetus shower. They go to a baby shower, even when the baby's still in the womb. So we know what they are, and this semantic game that is played, and this unwillingness to understand maybe some of the priorities are certainly what you and Evelyn have helped us understand. So, Sharon, thanks for calling today.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see if we can get another phone call in, and we'll go out to New Mexico. I think it's GL. I would love to hear what you have to say.
All right. We on the air, huh?
You're on the air. You got the floor.
I appreciate your program. You talk a lot of sense on it. And these people that thinks it's torture, I'm not there. I don't know exactly what our troops or any troops does except cutting heads off, our enemies anyway. But if they would think what they extract from these prisoners, if it in the long run saved their family or their wives or their children and their wives, they wouldn't think too much about it, I don't think. What's your opinion on that?
Well, again, I don't want to just give people an authority to do anything. That looks like the stormtroopers. It looks like Nazi Germany, all those kinds of things. But again, back to my key illustration that I've used on a number of occasions, but I'll say it again in case somebody's just tuned in. There are too many things now under the category of enhanced interrogation that are labeled as torture. And it seems to me that we need to come back and get some good dictionary definitions, I should say, because torture, in our minds, oftentimes is cutting off limbs and sticking needles in people and causing tremendous pain. I see that very different than what used to be called enhanced interrogation, where you keep a person in a room for a long period of time. Oftentimes, maybe they're even having a little trouble controlling themselves because they need a bathroom break. You cause sleep deprivation, all the rest. We know that some of those kind of interrogation techniques, which are used in America, which are not considered torture, and have brought many times confessions from individuals and thus incarcerations, that can be abused too. Any government program can be abused, but it seems to me that that is very different than calling that torture. And as I've used before, I'm being somewhat facetious, but really if sleep deprivation, solitary confinement, having people yell at you are torture, then I guess I was tortured when I was going through fraternity initiation. I mean, really. And then you could also say, well, we're torturing all of our troops when they go through basic training and on and on and on. And I think at this point, a lot of people roll their eyes and say, we need better definitions. And at the same time, we need to have a closer scrutiny. And again, I think maybe there's an action item where some of us might want to write to Senator Richard Burr, who will be the incoming chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I know many of our listeners are in North Carolina. He is your senator. You might express your opinion to him as well. Let's take a break, but just before we do so, since it's the Christmas season, I thought I'd read today from Bob Knight. Robert Knight is with us so many times. And he talks about the very sad case that developed out of California. And this is where a local charity teamed up with a middle school in San Marcos, California, to raise money to feed orphans in Africa. Now, you can't think of a better thing to do during Christmas, right? Well, it turns out that the ACLU went ballistic because the local group was partnering with an Illinois-based group called Kids Around the World. And for some of our listeners in Illinois, we just got a call a minute ago from Peoria, Illinois. You're probably familiar with Kids Around the World. They were going to raise $3,500 to feed 14,000 meals for children in Tanzania. So what's the problem? Why did the ACLU get upset? Well, Kids Around the World is a Christian organization. Whoa, that did it. Cool. Cannot have a Christian organization in any way possibly teaming up with a middle school in California. And so the public schools parents and pupils assisting orphans in Africa, simply because it was distributing the aid, was a Christian group, that was deemed as illegal. And so as a result, they had to back down because of part of the California Constitution, Section 5, Article 16, which when I read it doesn't look like it prohibits this from taking place at all. And so, interestingly enough, you have another good example of this issue of religious liberty. Now, as Robert Knight says, quote, the funds come from donations, not public coffers, and the organization collecting it, Friends and Family, explains on their website that we appreciate the rich diversity of our community and do not require participation in religious activities. Much of our volunteer base comes from different faith communities, and many participants have no religious affiliation at all. But because the group is Christian, that was it. And he goes on to give us many other examples of what he calls religious cleansing. For example, when a chapter of Mother Teresa's ministry was told that they could partner with New York City on projects for the poor only if they took down any religious symbol such as crucifix. Or the one that happened this year where after 10 years of litigation, Salvation Army had to agree to a settlement with the New York branch of the ACLU that allows the charity to receive government funds as long as they do not require employees to adhere to its Christian creed or evangelize clients. One more example during the Christmas season we see of the threats to our religious liberty. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking with Troy Newman of Operation Rescue. His book is entitled Abortion Free. What can you do practically and constructively to maybe close down an abortion clinic in your community? We'll learn from him and give you a chance to join our conversation. If you'd like to know more about him or the other articles we've posted today, they're all available at the website, pointofview.net. Please go there. When you go there, you might also consider what you might do to donate to this ministry.
Many years ago, a third grader named Jeremy was stuck in a car day after day waiting for his sister's choir practice to end. While there, he heard Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson talk about God's perspective on issues. And today, that boy is Jeremy Dice, Senior Counsel with the Liberty Institute. People who supported us years ago helped make Jeremy the champion that he is today. Recently, one of our supporters left Point of View an $18,000 gift in his will to help us keep making a difference. Your gift today will help double that to $36,000. We need gifts of all sizes, and I challenge you, be one of the few to give $1,000 or several more at $250, and it'll take many more at $100 or $50. God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation today to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call us 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on, and if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about abortion clinics and abortion in particular, but really the desire that we have to close many of them down, because, as we close abortion clinics, babies are saved. Family planning and abortion clinics constitute about a $2 billion a year industry. About 40% of all of the country's abortions are performed by Planned Parenthood. What can we do in our local communities? Actually, there's quite a bit. We're going to talk about that from a practical sense today as we talk with Troy Newman, who is the president of Operation Rescue, actively involved for more than 20 years on behalf of the preborn, and he has really developed a number of tactics which will be helpful not only in closing abortion clinics, but also sometimes in garnering criminal prosecutions for abortionists. He is the co-author of this book, Abortion Free. It's about 300 pages. We have information about it. It's published by WND Books, and the foreword by Dr. Alveda King. Troy Newman, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure.
Well, it's great to have someone from Operation Rescue back on the program. And this is a manual for building a pro-life America. I thought we might begin with you, because a good portion of the first part of the book talks about what happened in Wichita, but you took some of those ideas from Los Angeles, or Southern California, I should say, there. So let's, if we can, talk a little bit about your experience before you came to Wichita, and then how you began to use those effectively in that community.
Kerby, one of the things that is kind of the hallmark of the Operation Rescue and the pro-life movement is back in the early 90s, a lot of us were so convicted that abortion was murder that we went so far as just to peacefully sit in front of the doors of an abortion clinic, and sometimes we would get arrested and hauled off to jail for that. And it was just a trespassing fine. But we'd close the doors of an abortion clinic for a few hours or for a day, but never permanently.
Right.
And it wasn't until the early 90s when I was in San Diego, and Suresh Gandotra, a terrible abortionist who was in southern San Diego County, right across the border from Mexico, he killed a woman by the name of Magdalena Rodriguez. Horrible botched abortion. We went to work and we complained to the medical board. We held a press conference in front of his abortion clinic. We asked the district attorney to press charges. And you know what happened? God answered those prayers. The district attorney filed charges against him. They closed the abortion clinic. He actually fled the country. But for the first time, I saw an abortion clinic close, and I said, this is where we need to be. We need to stop going to jail. We need to put the other guys in jail, because they're the ones that are breaking God's law and violating the very fundamental human rights precepts that our country's been founded on.
I might just mention we've posted a video, too, that talks about make your community abortion free, I should say. And it also includes not only you, but Dr. Gary Cass, who's been on the program and talking about some of these practical ideas. So you began to recognize that in Southern California, you could actually close an abortion clinic. And so a good portion of your book in the beginning here really talks about what you did as you brought some of those ideas to Wichita, Kansas, because for those listeners that maybe are younger and haven't listened to this program, for some time we were talking about Dr. Tiller, the killer, in Wichita. And, of course, you are going to be talking about people other than him. But help us work our way through, because your book is really a very practical manual, first of all, historically on what you did in Wichita, and then second of all, what any one of our listeners could do with maybe a camera, a video recorder, some other things to begin to bring about some of those same changes in their own community.
Right. And thanks for mentioning that, because historically, Wichita, we called it the Summer of Mercy in 1991. It was the pinnacle of not only the abortion rights movement, but also the pinnacle of Operation Rescue's peaceful, nonviolent tactics to close down abortion clinics. We said that we'll never end embryonic stem cell research, where they're taking a baby that's 1 cell to 100 cells big, just a very small human individual, and they're using them for human experimentation. We'll never stop that if we're having the largest late-term abortion clinic in the free world right in the heartland of America.
Right.
So even though we were closing abortion clinics throughout Southern California, we pulled up our office, and I sold my little business, and I moved my family to Wichita, Kansas, the abortion capital of the world. Mr. Tiller was doing abortions on women, late-term abortions on women from all over the country. A lot of times we call France a liberal country. They don't have abortions after 3 months. America does. America, Canada, and China have abortions all the way through 9 months of pregnancy, and George Tiller specialized in this.
Well, again, Tiller's Women's Health Care Services. And again, I recognize we have some listeners that maybe are new to this. We always pick up new listeners, and some of them may not be familiar with the fact that he had an arrangement with the local motel. He had, in a sense, all sorts of connections with then governor, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But talk about what it took for him to build this abortion center right there in the middle of kind of the heartland of America.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton wrote a book that it takes a community, or it takes a city to raise a child. I think that's what it was. But it also takes a city to kill a child, because there's a network that you've got to develop. As you mentioned, a late-term abortion facility, those late-term abortions take 2, 3, sometimes 4 days to dilate that cervix large enough to extract that baby. So he's got to have connections with Governor Sebelius, the Attorney General, the District Attorney, the local hospital. You mentioned the local motels, because these women were stabled there as almost an adjunct to his abortion facility during the midst of this 3 and 4 day procedure. And so this whole network, a climate of death, was built here in America's heartland, and we had to systematically dismantle it. First thing we did was we said, we called a spade, that this place was the largest freestanding late-term abortion facility in the free world outside of communist China. And we began taking some of the pictures of the horrible pictures of the victims of what Mr. Tiller did to his abortion victims, and display them and tell the community, this is what's going on in this place. And we had to shock their conscience, honestly, because, here in the heartland, people will say, well, something like that might happen in New York or in a big city in L.A., but certainly not in Wichita. And then we went after and exposed the politicians, the local city council members and local state reps and state senators, and all the way up to the Attorney General and Governor Sebelius, who helped support and cover up for the crimes. Next, we elected an Attorney General, Phil Klein.
Phil Klein, yeah.
Oh, great man of God. He relentlessly pursued the criminal actions, because, we've been really good as a movement, the pro-life movement, of passing pro-life legislation all across America. We've been really bad at the enforcement of these laws. So even though Kansas is a red state, was a red state, we were really bad at enforcing the laws that they had passed to obstruct Mr. Tiller from doing these late-term abortions.
Let me jump in, because we have one of those breaks, but when we come back, I want to continue that, because, boy, again, it just illustrates who you elect. I mean, Phil Klein, who was the Attorney General. I mean, think of the difference between Governor Kathleen Sebelius and Governor Sam Brownback. I mean, you can see that elections really do matter. So we're going to take a break, continue our conversation with Troy Newman. By the way, I'll open up the phones. People are already calling in, as I suspect they would. 1-800-351-1212, talking about abortion free. We'll continue that right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
What will be the financial impact of President Obama's executive order concerning nearly 5 million undocumented immigrants? The White House has acknowledged that these newly legalized workers will contribute to Social Security and Medicare. Will this help us with our current crisis of entitlements or make the problem worse? There are some who believe that it will help since we will have millions more paying into Social Security and Medicare. I even had one caller suggest this might be a way to deal with a problem created by abortion. We have aborted millions of unborn children who could have been taxpayers paying into the system. As millions of baby boomers are retiring, he thought these new immigrants might replace those lost to abortion. Dr. Merrill Matthews runs the numbers and shows that there might be an initial benefit that will be followed by a financial unbalance that will make the problem much worse. The long-term unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare are at $49 trillion. We already have a problem because people are retiring and receiving these benefits and receiving more in benefits than those two programs that they paid into the system. The newly legalized immigrants will be paying into the system even less for two reasons. First, their likely income will be less than the average worker, and second, they will be paying into the system for a shorter time. Most of the newly legalized are working-age adults with children already in their 40s who would only pay FICA taxes for perhaps 15 to 20 years. They may help the government trust fund initially, assuming they all quickly find good-paying jobs, but they will be fully eligible for these government programs when they retire. Using one simulation model, Dr. Matthews estimates that the government will receive about $500 billion in payroll tax revenue, and the government could expect to pay out about $2 trillion in benefits over several decades. In other words, if you do the math, you see that this executive order will make the entitlement crisis even worse. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Troy Newman, co-author of the book Abortion Free, forward by Dr. Alveda King, and it is a book about 300 pages. You'll certainly want to get a copy of it, and it's a very practical manual for building a pro-life community, one step at the time. And you mentioned Phil Klein just a minute ago here, an attorney general. It shows, I think, so well, Troy, the value of electing the right individuals. Passing legislation is important, getting the right people in office, and Phil Klein really is very prominent in the first part of your book because of his willingness to take on George Tiller, to take on Kathleen Sebelius, and take on kind of that abortion complex there in Wichita.
Oh, it was a cabal of corrupt politicians and a bureaucracy that was stacked in the deck was stacked in the favor of this abortionist that had been operating here with impunity for 40 years. And Phil Klein was a state legislator who had passed strict, very tough pro-life legislation, but he was convicted that the officials weren't doing enough to prosecute and enforce these laws. So we helped him get elected, and his campaign promise to me personally was he was going to go ahead and investigate George Tiller and the big Planned Parenthood in the state, and if they're violating the laws, he would prosecute them, and he did. And you're right, elections have consequences. We just saw a big election here 2 years ago in Virginia where the pro-life governor lost, pro-abortion governor came in and is now dismantling all the protections that we put in place for the innocent preborn child. So it's very important we go to the ballot box. It's very important that we vote our conscience, and we understand everybody from dog catcher all the way up to governor or president what their position is, and then hold them accountable to these pro-life views that we have.
One other one I'm going to put on the table for just a minute, too, is you talked about that information. That's kind of interesting when you were talking about abortion in the 9th month. We just had somebody call in, didn't come on the air, but we have some others that do want to come on the air, and surprised that abortions take place in the 9th month. That was a surprise to people in Kansas, even today. I suspect there are people listening going, no, there aren't. Abortions don't take place in the 3rd trimester. Well, yes, they do in some states, don't they?
Well, we had to debunk that another myth of the left that abortions take place in the 9th month. What we did is we actually set up an undercover investigation. There was a large hotel building behind George Tiller's abortion clinic, and I bought a great telephoto lens, and I was able to document women going in that are visibly 7, 8, 9 months along. Of course, the media was saying they didn't do abortions at that stage. We meticulously blurred out the faces of all of these women, and we presented our findings to the national media. And at that point, it completely silenced them. They didn't report on it, but it silenced their objections to us saying that he did late-term abortions. And that's how we began to stem the tide. It doesn't happen overnight. You slowly and methodically start to change people's minds and attitudes about abortion. And I'll tell you what, Kerby, when you start talking about abortion, or I like to say preferably killing an innocent child in the 9th month of gestation, we win 90% of the American people. 90% of the people are on our side and being against late-term abortions. That's how horrific, how it hits you right there in the gut.
I would think so. Let's take some phone calls along the way, but we're going to get into some very practical things you can do to build a pro-life America one community at a time. But we'll go to David in North Carolina, WGNN. Thank you for calling in today.
Yeah, a lot of us people are really uninformed. My problem that I have with this abortion thing is I find that we're using judges and less than, and we got more. We have almost 95% of the judges we got that we've they're not even elected judges to pass this kind of garbage laws that they're passing down on our people. I have no earthly idea of understanding why that they're allowed to do this, and why don't the abortion clinics? Why don't we prosecute the abortion clinics and put them in jail instead of the people that's protesting against these things?
Okay, well, you've asked a couple of good questions. First of all, the judges issue. Sooner or later, you have some kind of accountability because who you elect as your governor or who you elect as your president or whatever it might be will appoint judges. Now, some judges have to actually stand for retention elections, but one way or another, what we do and how we vote in November really does determine even what judges will do and whether they'll strike down legislation that protects women or not. So that's something we should also pay attention to, right, Troy?
Absolutely. Elections do have consequences. Some judges are elected, but we have to check out who they are. You made a very great point that it's almost Patton-esque. General Patton said famously, nobody ever wins a war by dying for their country. You make the other guy die for his country. And when I was looking into this, I said, we need to do the same thing in the pro-life movement. I'm tired of going to jail. I'm tired of wearing the orange jumpsuit for trespassing. Let's make the other guy go to jail. Just last week, Kerby, Naresh Patel out of Oklahoma City was arrested selling abortions to women who weren't pregnant. This was part of a 1-year investigation that I was involved in. We spearheaded this, brought the information to a very good pro-life attorney general in Oklahoma, General Pruitt, and he began his own investigation based on our information. This man's now in jail, or he may have bonded out, but he's being charged this week, and his abortion clinic is closed. When we close abortion clinics, it has a direct result of saving babies. You look at the rate of abortion, the numbers of abortion, the numbers of abortion clinics, they've all waterfalled downward in the last 15 years as a direct result of these very practical methods of closing abortion clinics.
I might just mention that we do have a link to your website, operationrescue.org. First article there is the one about Naresh Patel in Oklahoma. For our Oklahoma listeners, you may be well familiar with that, but for people around the country, you may not be aware of another abortionist that actually has been arrested. And I'd like to spend some time and then open up the phones for comments on some of the practical suggestions. You do such a good job in the first part of the book about what happens in Wichita, and I think you've got some great opportunity here to learn some lessons vicariously from you about how you were able to end the Tiller abortion legacy. But let's, if we can, just real quickly get into what you call the nuts and bolts. What does it take to actually do that? And the first thing is back to gathering the fact. Talked about what it took in the case of getting a telephoto lens. We might also talk about if you're in a state where you can record conversations, some of the conversations you can record from an abortion clinic can be used as evidence in a trial or an investigation. So talk about how we can be sort of the eyes and ears for the pro-life community.
That's an excellent point. One of the best tools we've found is the public records search. The open and honest government is key to having, a form of a republic that we have. So, an open record search, or like say the 911 calls. When you have a botched abortion at a local abortion clinic, and you know that a woman has been there for an abortion, she's been carted off in an ambulance. Oftentimes they call 911 because they don't have hospital privileges. In other words, they're not quality physicians that you can bring them to their local hospital and treat them. They've got to call 911 just as if you've fallen off the curb or gotten a car wreck. Well, you go get those 911 calls, and it's very, very effective to see what they say. A woman could be hemorrhaging badly. She may have died. She may not be breathing. You take that information and you make it public, and we're great at these press releases where you detail who the abortionist was, what time it happened, take the picture of the ambulance, maybe get the recording from the 911 call or the CAD transcript detailing what happened, and then you can go to the medical board and say, look, this guy just botched another abortion, because we keep track of them all. You go to the district attorney and say, is there something illegal going on there? And you might want to investigate. And, of course, the media does their job of showing how bad this place is, and each one of those degrades their ability, another war analogy, degrades the enemy's ability to make war on the children, but degrades their ability to sell abortions, because women are going to be exposed to the horrific and trauma that these women experienced. And overall, it decreases their business and puts them out of business.
Let's take a break, and we'd love to hear from some of you that maybe have questions about how to close down an abortion clinic in your community. Maybe you've been successful in doing so. We'd love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. This book, about 300 pages, a whole section in the back here on resources where it has various pro-life organizations and various pro-life legal organizations and blogs and other resources. And one of the endorsements, of course, comes from our friend David B. Wright, National Director for 40 Days for Life. He calls this a definitive guidebook on how to expose and close abortion facilities. So we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation with Troy Newman as we talk about the book that he co-authored, Abortion Free. That coming up right after this.
C.S. Lewis once wrote that there is no such thing as an ordinary person, because every one of us will live forever, either in darkness or in glory. Point of View deals with eternal things, applying God's truth to all of life of those made in the Creator's image. God has used Point of View to inspire all kinds of people, from congressmen to attorneys, school administrators to police officers, doctors to maintenance men, and everything in between. And one, very recently, left an $18,000 gift in his will to help us keep making a difference. I'd love to see one person today give $5,000, and a handful more send $300, and maybe you can give $30 or $100. Help us match that gift before the end of this year. God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Give online at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or mail your donation to Point of View Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Troy Newman with us as we talk about his book, Abortion Free, Your Manual for Building a Pro-Life America One Community at a Time, published by WND Books. You can find out more on their website. You can order it as well through ours if you want to follow all the links. And it is a 300-page book with lots of very practical suggestions and, if you will, time-tested effective methods to really close down abortion clinics. What are your thoughts? Would love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Is it time to stop putting pro-life demonstrators in prison or in jail and instead put abortionists in jail? Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those in just a minute. But Troy, you talked about open records, and you have chapters here, for example, on how to identify and research the abortionist. You have chapters on some of the kind of ways in which you can look up their license and find out a little bit more about the clinic. Go into that in a little more detail, because I want to really equip our listeners to recognize what might be the first step in them maybe being able to bring an investigation against an abortion clinic.
Yeah, another lie from the left is abortionists are just as qualified as your local cardiologist or brain surgeon, when exactly opposite is the truth. If you look up an abortionist, or for this matter, any doctor's medical license or the medical license application, it's public record. You can also go down to the courthouse and find out what sort of lawsuits that he's been involved in. And with the advent of the Internet, boy, you can find out all kinds of stuff, even from places that are not your state. And what we have found is that an abortionist doesn't rise to that level. They don't come out of medical school and, boy, they work their tail off and they really get to this high level of perfection and they become an abortionist. The opposite is true. They come out of medical school and they start making mistake after mistake after mistake, and they sink to the lowest possible position that a physician can find himself in, and that is sucking out a baby's body from a uterus about the size of a small water balloon, day in and day out. Your local family physician has more continuing education, knows more, does more on a daily basis than an abortionist does. And so what happens with this redundancy is they'll perforate a uterus, lacerate a cervix, give too much anesthesia to somebody, like in the case of Laura Hope Smith, where she died. You find this information out, and then you report it back to the medical board or the powers that be, and you demand that this person's medical license be revoked.
Very good. Again, as I've said on this program many times before, but let me repeat it one more time. People, men and women, do not go into medical school to do an abortion. I mean, it is kind of the backwater of the medical procedures and the profession anyway. And as you point out, if they've made mistakes or if they have various kinds of behaviors that have caused them to sink to that level, you oftentimes have an opportunity, as you said, to pull their license. What if maybe they don't have that vulnerability? You have a chapter about making an undercover call. One thing I learned from that chapter is don't call an abortion clinic as an undercover call where they know it's from Operation Rescue. I learned that's a great story. I had to laugh out loud when I read that one. But for the listeners, maybe you can tell the whole story, but also what not to do and how to do it, because those undercover phone calls, if you are in a state where you can legally record a phone call, those are outstanding opportunities as well to close down in a clinic, aren't they?
Yeah, you can find out a lot when you just ask for an appointment for an abortion. If you know, say, the legal limit is 12 weeks in your state or 6 months or something, and they're willing to give you an appointment for an abortion after that stage, bam, you've got them. They'll also violate, oftentimes, the 24-hour waiting period. They'll tell you, hey, our state says you have to wait 24 hours before you can have your abortion, or you have to have a sonogram, or you have to have some sort of informed consent sort of information where you're given fetal development information. But they'll tell you on the sly, just come on down this afternoon, we'll do the abortion today. Bam! They're breaking the law. Well, you did read the funny story. A lot of the things that we learn in life are through mistakes. And you can do *67 to block your phone call. And when you get a phone call, even on your cell phone, it says block number or something like that. And that's what we generally do when we're calling an abortion clinic. But the warning is it does not work on an 800 number. So I called an 800 number abortion clinic, and I began to go through the litany, and I was trying to catch them in the act. And at the end, they said, gee, that's really weird that you're calling from Operation Rescue.
Then you hung up the phone.
I said, yeah, that's weird. Click.
Click, yeah. But learn a lesson, especially where you're calling from. Don't call it from your church number or whatever it is, But again, you make a list of questions that you would like to have answered. And of course, we've had on this program, Troy, a number of times, whether it's been Mark Crutcher or some of the other, Lila Rose and all the rest. I mean, these are individuals that have been able to catch individuals who have been willing to do an abortion when it's obviously been a statutory rape or something like that. So you've really over the years been able to use some of these undercover phone calls or these undercover various kinds of investigations to show that these are not the most reputable people that run many of these abortion clinics.
Well, take Mr. Patel, this man that was arrested last week. This man was dumping medical records in the trash, which is a clear violation of HIPAA. It's a federal law to protect your privacy. It's about patient privacy, but he didn't care about that. And our assumption here is, and I believe the investigators will find this out, if you go into an abortion clinic and say pay $400 or $500 for an abortion, and he wants cash, and you're never going to see that man again, or more than likely you'll never see him again, that medical record goes directly into the trash, and the money goes right in his pocket, and it's not reported to the IRS. There's another abortionist, Michelson, I think it's up in Michigan. It's on our website there. This man we had detailed many times of sexual assault allegations by women who were in the abortion clinic, and they felt under anesthesia. Boy, I think this guy did more than an abortion. I feel sexually violated, and I get these calls on a regular basis. Well, it turns out this guy was just indicted on federal child porn charges, had thousands upon thousands of child pornography pictures on his computer. He's in jail. He's not getting out. I mean, this guy's not getting out at all. Again, that's the sort of people that we're dealing with in the abortion industry. My dear friend, Father Frank Pavone of Priest for Life, likes to say that you cannot practice vice virtuously. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you're killing children every single day and you're pilfering that money, you're probably using drugs, which a lot of times they're soothing their conscience, right, or somehow deadening their conscience through the use of drugs and alcohol or sexual promiscuity. What's going to keep you from violating this woman's privacy or sexually violating her? Brian Finkel, a man out of Arizona, and Kerby, I know you know who this guy is. Mm-hmm. He did 20% of all the abortions in Arizona. He's now serving 35 years to life in prison in Arizona for raping women. Oh, at the end of his trial, over 100 women had come forward saying, I was raped by this man during their abortion. It's horrible. That's the abortion cartel. And when we talk about these things, we expose the truth. We win. We change people's minds. We save babies. And we close abortion clinics. And
again, we've talked about, of course, Dr. Kermit Gosnell and others. So, I mean, we are talking about the lowest of the low. But again, just to be practical for just a few more minutes, let's talk about, you have a chapter on the confidential informant, because sometimes that is very helpful to you in closing down some of these abortion clinics.
You know, Jesus says you have not because you ask not, or because you ask amiss. And I always ask Jesus, help me close this abortion clinic down. You know, Rumsfeld was famous for his, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns and all that. Well, I want to know what I don't know. Lord, what is it that you want me to know or I should know to close this abortion clinic down? And you put the word out that you're looking for information, and lo and behold, oftentimes God will send you a little bird that will tell you in the ear exactly what's going on, and oftentimes that comes in the form of someone that works in or did work inside that abortion clinic. We've been able to talk with countless inside informants, and I still have informants inside the abortion cartel that will call me and tell me things about where somebody's violating the law. And what's interesting, I found this to be true. Oftentimes, the people that get involved in abortion clinics are pro-abortion in theory. In other words, they believe the lie of the left and, women shouldn't have to, blah, blah, blah. But when they work in an abortion clinic, they see the real-life application.
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm.
They see the blood, they see the gore, they see the corruption, the sexual. They want to tell somebody. And if you're open and willing to hear that information and to nurture this person along, again, this is good information that we can bring to authorities. Again, that's what happened with Patel. It happened with Laura Hope Smith, and Rapino Santanhan went to jail. Brian Finkel went to jail again and again. The inside informant is your best witness because it's an eyewitness, and they can go to the authorities.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about how to get that information out, because you have to figure out how to get that message past the gatekeepers, how to write an effective press release, and then how to use some of the networking opportunities that we have now. We have so much more at our disposal, some very good techniques, and Troy Newman will help us understand those right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Troy Newman with me for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Abortion Free is the book. Just before I take another phone call, though, Troy, I'd like to talk about dealing with the media. And I sometimes still hear people say, nobody will listen to me. I can't get this information out to the media. And as I guess the oldest person around the table here today, let me just say I can remember a time when, it was pretty much controlled. The news was pretty much controlled by the three major networks. And if you wanted to get something on a radio station, it again was controlled by ABC. And newspapers are controlled by a liberal bias. But now that's not a very effective argument, because there are so many other ways to get your information out. And you have a very good set of chapters here on how to get the message past the gatekeepers, how to write effective press releases, and how to use some of the new media to get the information out and to begin to create a buzz.
Yeah, the best thing you can do, number one, is to be professional. And to use language that's going to be read and picked up by the media. If you see an abortion clinic that is botching an abortion and there's a woman that could possibly be maimed or dead, you don't want to start out with, pro-life hyperbole. You tell the facts. On this day, this happened. and we suspect this. And then you put your information, your rhetoric, if you will, in a quote. We decry the fact that this abortion clinic is butchering women and harming babies, that sort of thing. Next, as you mentioned, oftentimes this information falls on deaf ears with the major networks. But with the advent of the Internet, with Facebook, with Twitter, being able to build your own media contact list through emails, and it's very simple. Even an amateur can do this. In fact, we started as amateurs. One great example, you mentioned Kermit Gosnell, the gruesome late-term abortionist out of Philadelphia, who was being actually charged and ultimately convicted for first-degree murder of innocent babies. The first time in 42 years an abortionist has been convicted of murder for killing babies. Well, the media was ignoring the trial, literally ignoring it. So we coined a term called a tweet fest. You may, hear and participate in these tweet fests now, but last year it was an unknown term, and we began tweeting at certain people, Fox News personnel, Anderson Cooper. We tweeted directly at him, hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of tweets, so his inbox filled up. And you know what? The Friday after that trial started, they're still picking jurors. I saw Anderson Cooper on a Friday night devote 17 uninterrupted minutes to Kermit Gosnell. That's unheard of, but it was done because the outcry of the American people, the information was correct, it was atrocious enough, they say if it leads, it bleeds, and if you get the right information into their hands, even if it doesn't fit their liberal paradigm, you can get them to report it because it's news. To be on the news, you have to be newsworthy.
Outstanding. Just also, let's talk about this idea of using a complaint form, because you talked about also pulling the license from a clinic or from a doctor, but it seems to me that filing some of those complaints, which also could be part of that media exposure that gives you a chance to get the attention of some of the people in the community.
The number one thing that the abortion industry fears today is not the picketer out front or the prayer warrior, but the complaint form. Mm-hmm. Just last week, there's an abortionist who is an abortionist with George Tiller. Her name is Ann Kristen Newhouse. We found out she was violating the law, but at the time, the district attorney and the new attorney general wouldn't do anything. So we put all this information on paper, documented it every which way we could, had the paperwork to prove it, and then downloaded a complaint form from the Kansas Board of Healing Arts. This is the licensing board of the state to license a doctor. And we submitted it to them. And with Sam Brownback as our new governor, who replaced a lot of the old lefties that were sitting there on the Kansas Board of Healing Arts board, they looked at this complaint and they said, this is a valid complaint, and they began their own investigation. You see, every bureaucracy has their own complaint form. You can go down to your, local dog catcher and say, I want to complain about my local dog catcher. Well, here's your complaint form, sir. Fill that out. Fill it out appropriately and professionally. Like I said, give the facts, not hyperbole or rhetoric or assumptions or myths or legends. Give the facts, and then watch the bureaucracy take over. Because that complaint form, once it gets into the system and you get a complaint number, you're going to win 9 times out of 10. And we put a lot of abortion clinics out of business that way.
Very good. Let me just, before I let you go, though, we'll get calls maybe on another day on some of these important issues, because I wanted to give you a chance to at least expose the book. I think we did a pretty good job of covering 300 pages in about an hour. But let's, if we can, talk about what's on your website, operationrescue.org. You have a whole section here on about abortion, what abortion is, abortion in America, late-term abortions, women killed by abortion, some ways in which you can give people some ideas about how to deal with the press and multimedia resources and all sorts of things. But let's talk about that for just a minute, because I suspect we do have a number of activists. There might be some saying, I didn't know I could do anything about that abortion clinic down the street. Guess I need to get that book. But maybe the first step is to make contact with you and see if you can give them some guidance and direction on what they might want to do in their community.
Thank you for mentioning the website, Kerby, because it's not just a promotional website. I look at it as an informational website. The abuses inside the abortion industry are being documented every single day at operationrescue.org. We talked about botched abortions, near-death experiences that women are having, actual deaths. We've documented dozens and dozens of women who have been murdered by their abortionists inside abortion clinics, women who think they're just going in for a, quote, safe legal procedure. We mentioned Michaelis out of Michigan, who has been indicted on child pornography charges. Mentioned Brian Finkel, who's sitting in jail right now. Kermit Gosnell, who's sitting in jail right now. Rapino Santhanhond. The list is really endless, and what you can find on this website is the actual truthful, documented evidence of what's going on, possibly in an abortion clinic near you. You can take that information to the street where you pray or where you picket. You can take it to your city council and begin discussing with them, just on its face, is this the sort of place of business that we want in our community? Ask those sorts of questions. There's been 10 ambulances at this particular abortion clinic. Actually, I'll give you a real-life example. In St. Louis, there's been 21 ambulance runs to a Planned Parenthood in St. Louis over the past 18 months. Is this the sort of, quote, medical clinic we want in our community that are harming women and killing children? Take that to the bank when you start asking the bureaucrats and medical boards and media members, and I'm going to find out that this abortion clinic is going to close.
And I might just mention, those of you that are listening in the state of Ohio, for example, Virginia, a number of others, right now you have all sorts of interesting stories coming out of there about some of those clinics. So even though we're looking at this from a national point of view, the real action takes place in the state and local communities. And so we hope that you'll find out exactly what's happening in your community, and you can find that out by going to Operation Rescue. So, Troy, I appreciate your good work. I appreciate this excellent book. It is a very good manual for building a pro-life community, and we appreciate you being on the program with us today to educate us.
It's really been all my pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
And the book is entitled Abortion Free. We have a link so that you can, of course, make your way to Operation Rescue and find it there. We also have a place where you can just click on it and order it directly, any way you want to do it. But again, operationrescue.org is a good place to get it. And, of course, it's also WND Books, and you should be able to find it somewhere as well. We're out of time, and we'll get to some of your phone calls probably tomorrow, but we wanted to give him a chance to kind of go through this in some detail, and we did. And we'll give you a chance to join our conversation tomorrow as we get into some other very important issues, but feel free to visit our website. We have the links on all the various articles and videos that would be of help to you. We have our Take Action section. We have, of course, my Viewpoint section, and it's all available to you at pointofview.net. So please take the time to visit the website, explore it a little bit, and, of course, there's a place where you can click on that button that says Donate. I want to thank Doug and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Many years ago, a third grader named Jeremy was stuck in a car day after day waiting for his sister's choir practice to end. While there, he heard Marlon Maddox and Kerby Anderson talk about God's perspective on issues. And today, that boy is Jeremy Dice, Senior Counsel with the Liberty Institute. People who supported us years ago helped make Jeremy the champion that he is today. Recently, one of our supporters left Point of View an $18,000 gift in his will to help us keep making a difference. Your gift today will help double that to $36,000. We need gifts of all sizes, and I challenge you, be one of the few to give $1,000 or several more at $250, and it'll take many more at $100 or $50. God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Give online at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation today to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Or call us 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.